Today I'm going to be talking about a project I've been working on for a bit called GPT-NYC. As far as I know, it's the first and only city-specific language generation model. And I do want to say I did a presentation about this recently for the machine learning collaborative research show and tell type thing, but I only had 6 minutes and I didn't get to cover everything that I wanted to talk about. So I thought I should make my own video and sort of explain what's going on. So language models, if you're new to natural language processing, you start out with a huge amount of unorganized text, usually from the web, and then the pre-training process is how you get one of these models to understand English on some level. Then to make something happen that's specific to your task, you go through another phase of training called fine-tuning. Of the language models that are out there in the world, some of the most common ones based on which task you're trying to do. BERT sort of is used to fill in words. It can also be trained to do more traditional machine learning problems like classification and regression. Sequence to sequence is, as you can imagine, getting a bunch of words from one place to another that can be used for translation or summarization. I have another project that uses that for flipping the gender of a sentence in Spanish. And then the GPT models like GPT-2, GPT-3, GPT-Neo being another one, is you give them a language prompt and then send it off. And there's a probability tree of what word should it say next and what word should it say after that. And it'll just keep rambling forever until it starts repeating itself, or you tell it, I really only needed like 50 words after this. So when I say GPT NYC, I'm telling NLP people this is the specific model architecture that I'm working with. In this case, GPT-2 is the start. And I'm going to fine tune it on posts from the AskNYC subreddit. So this is a subreddit that was created in August 2012. There are already two other New York City subreddits. I won't go into the dynamics behind that, but they essentially there were so many people who are visiting New York or moving to New York for the first time, and people who live there locally don't want to see all their questions all the time. So there's a separate subreddit, Ask NYC, where it's a safe space for you to ask whatever question is on your mind. And also, lots of people who've lived there for a long time have questions. They're like, hey, how can I get into this? Or I saw somebody doing this the other day. What is that about? Um, or how do you feel about this particular thing that's happening now, especially with COVID? But pushshift.io, where I'm getting these posts, the last in their archive is December 2019, so we're going to see all pre-COVID information. And I know there's a lot of concerns about the content from Reddit. In this case, I'm filtering them so they're direct responses to the question. They're not like grandchild posts. And also, they need to have three or more votes. It starts out with one, so at least a couple other people have seen this and upvoted it. And there isn't a net downvote. Like if someone said something that's totally out of line, it'll be a negative amount of upvotes, and we won't include it in our fine tuning process. And then I had to decide what's the format. How are we going to train GPT-2? What's a question? What's an answer? And so I have a format sort of like this where there's a question, a dash, the remaining part of the question if they have like additional information, and then this percent, which I use to divide the question and the answer. So if you use GPT NYC on the Hugging Face website, you should include these marks to separate out your question. Quick word about vocabulary. So if you're not familiar with NLP, the first step in taking in this text is turning the text into, a vector representation, and that's a process called tokenization. We need to get the text and turn it into words that are in this model's vocabulary. And sometimes those words, those vocabulary tokens, are pieces of words that get glued together to mean things. I did a search of Ask NYC, sort of did a naive, like based on punctuation and spaces, what are the most common words that do not have their own token in the standard GPT-2 vocabulary. I think this is a good sample of the kind of words that you see. Touristy and gentrified, which is like just talking shop about living in New York. Midtown, like is a neighborhood. NYC itself. Blizzard, blotter, Bushwick, another neighborhood, adjudication, a complicated one, bellboy, oncoming, and then a lot of foods, dumpling, bagel, deli, and then I thought these were special interests, halal, which is like the halal guys, or it could be, making sure that you're finding food that's acceptable as a Muslim person. And then stroller, which is part of every parent's life these days, but GPT-2 currently splits it into the stroll and dash ER. And so there's a kind of a question, does that mean that GPT-2 doesn't know what a stroller is? That's not the case, because it sees those two tokens together a lot and builds some understanding. I felt like I should give these their own tokens. One, so I can start training them on the AskNYC context of how it uses these, but also because there's no reason it should be splitting up a word like bagel or halal when there's a lot of real specific interests around that, and our parents would be interested in whether they can take their stroller on a bus or something like that. So I don't have a good research paper about whether it means a lot that they're missing. There is a paper recently called Super Bizarre where they show that the model that they're using splits it into superb and then IZZA and then RE3 separate tokens when it really should be two tokens, super and bizarre. And then I just went ahead and even if it wasn't in the most common Ask NYC words, I added all of the neighborhoods, all of the subway stations, and a list of global foods that I found on Wikipedia as their own tokens. Yeah. So this was the initial GPT-NYC based on the small model, just like doing a proof of concept. And you can see two types of errors that I would get with this. The first one is I asked it a question about which is worse, the G train, LaGuardia, or JFK Airport. And it gave an interesting answer. It's talking about, the F train gets you to JFK Airport. It can be delayed in a few blocks. For example, if you want to get to Times Square, take the E into Williamsburg and then switch trains. It's talking like it's giving you directions, but if you know anything about New York, you'll know these directions are not based on fact. It's sort of like dropping in names and places as if it's talking about directions, but there isn't an actual factual basis to what it's saying. You couldn't follow these directions. The second example, see, after I uploaded on Hugging Face, I would say, oh, visiting NYC for 1 week. I wanted to see what it would suggest. Instead, because I didn't at that point have the question answer separators, it keeps filling out the question. So I said, visiting NYC for 1 week. It says, and hi guys, my wife and I are going to New York City for 1 week from Thursday to Sunday in April. We have two small children. So it starts writing a long form question based on what it thinks the question should look like, and that's not what I would want. So whenever I deploy this, I would want to have a specific way of structuring it so you're always writing a question and you're always getting the answer prompt. So then when I have the answer prompt figured out, this is with GPT-2 medium size, the answers started to get pretty reasonable. Is Bushwick good for families? Answer, family friendly. How often do you go to Central Park? Answer, every summer for the last 10 years. Then I asked this question, how do I get to Governor's Island? And it gave a URL. That's a real URL. So in this case, it's memorized the answer that people give to people asking about Governor's Island, and it's right. So this is an interesting case where maybe we could follow the probability distribution of answers to that question and see, oh, look, the top answer, once you start with HTTPS, it's really guiding you, like with these high probabilities, towards filling out the URL. So this is evidence that we're following a memorized answer. In the case of URL, that seems like a pretty good way to handle it, is use a memorized URL. If it was a more free-form question, maybe we wouldn't want to use a memorized question. In this case, I was interested, what do constructed answers look like? Well, like, are they going to be more like that rambling directions prompt? And so if I ask the question, where can I get authentic Indian food? I did sort of a crawl of all the possible responses to get the probability. And the probability of each of these is very small, but they're about the same. You see, there's not like one correct answer to where can I get authentic Indian food. Some of these answers are you can't get authentic Indian. Some of them say food truck. Some of them say you have to go to Bombay. You can't go to any Indian restaurant. Um, so these are sort of answers in the style that people might give, and then some of them are memorized. The one that's suggesting Sahiwalas or Bombay Food Hall, these are not real places. So I'm wondering, are those coming from the original GPT-2 before fine tuning? Um, it's sort of interesting that it's giving these responses and that they are all equally likely, even though they don't agree with each other. Another big point, which I didn't get to about so much during the original presentation, is on AskNYC, people ask a lot of questions about their cultural experiences or different things that they have seen wandering around, uh, different neighborhoods, different cuisines, feeling safe with their identity. And a common question is people say they're visiting with their relative that has these particular health problems or this particular accessibility issue, and they want to know what would be a fun or safe thing for them to do. And we don't want the language model to insult them. If you've read Stochastic Parrots, there's a lot of landmines in language models where, it'll quickly jump to some kind of insult or negative stereotype that's associated with people because it doesn't know the difference between, well, I mean, in some sense it does know, but in this case we've just told it to copy the style of Ask NYC and sort of copying that. Two papers that I'm looking at and want to write a post about in the future are LNAI's real toxicity prompts and from the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, probing toxic content in large pre-trained language models. This just became public in the past week or so. So one thing we could do with that is build some labeling or redo the training so it's less likely to do these toxic outputs. Or on the application side, we could run things through a toxicity detector like Perspective API and figure out if that's the response we really want to give. In the future, I would like to do some statistical analysis of the toxicity. Another thing that you could do is try to see specific facts like directions and URLs and memorization. I just tried GPT-2 Medium, but there's already models out there, GPT-2 Large, and the GPT-3 clone that was done by the community called GPT-Neo. That if I find the right language model, if I find the right GPU training, TPU training approach, it would be really interesting to rerun the data and fine tune a really large model like that to see what it comes up with. I also think because of the specific nature of New York, there aren't a ton of city subreddits that are just question and answers. But other examples that are in that same vein are Hawaii visitors and Japan travel. They have similar vibes of people coming from outside to want to know more about it. They also have that specialized vocabulary. When you saw how I did tokenization and reviewed what tokens are in the vocabulary, it would be interesting to see what rises to the top of Hawaii visitors and Japan travel. And that's where I'm at right now. I hope this was a good presentation and overview of what I'm doing with GPT NYC. It's available right now on the Hugging Face Model Hub.